workstations. BitLocker is a hard drive encryption, so if the laptop's stolen or the desktop's stolen, the hard drive basically is unusable unless you truly have the password to log into it. So in the HIPAA world where I came from in healthcare, it's not a reportable if it gets stolen and it has BitLocker on it because it's encrypted, so there's no way for them to get the information. Our firewalls, we've recently just updated those with the firmware, trying to stay on top of those as they are released. Just keeps us a lot safer. We moved our backups. We've shifted around backups a little bit. We were doing backups to SEI, our Southeastern Indiana REMC. We've shifted those to the cloud just to give us, well, first of all, that lowered our cost for the backups, and it gives us more flexibility of if we need to restore from or pull from them, we have that capability. With the cloud, there's capabilities of spinning those backups up in the cloud and not having to get hardware here. So it's beneficial to us, and then we also store backups here locally, so we can easily restore if we just have a server crash here locally and do it very quickly. We installed a network trafficking monitoring device. Hoosier actually provides this as a service to us at no cost. So they gave us an appliance that basically monitors our network for all the traffic in and out, trying to see if there's any computers communicating to ransomware sites or anything like that that we can quickly act on and shut those off. And then with all the updates, we've securely disposed of all of our old technology. So all the hard drives were shredded. I got a certificate of destruction, and we did that in a responsible manner with the environment. They recycle everything that they came and picked up and then destroyed it. One thing that I'm getting ready to start is I was able to get a grant from the state of Indiana for $5,000 to attend Purdue cyber training. So that will actually start in November for me to go through those courses. It's been a while since I've been in school, so it's a good refresher for me to go back and learn the new stuff as well as what I'm doing today. Another piece that we do, sorry, it's hard for me to see the screen, so I'm going to look at my computer a little bit. Another piece that we do is phishing testing. We use a company, No-B4 is actually through Hoosier too. They provide that to us without additional cost. And what this does is actually sends a phishing email to all employees. So every month we're sending phishing emails to employees, and we're seeing who's clicking on those. You can see at the very beginning there, well, in January, I don't think I got them sent out just starting, but you'll see it spiked to 11.5%. So we had 2 or 3 people click on the email, and it's starting to trend down. So national average for a company our size is around 5% after a year of doing training with this. This is something that we'll ramp up. I've talked to quite a few of the people because there's a couple of repeat offenders on there, and they'll usually come and talk to me because they get a little pop-up when they click on it, and letting them know it wasn't the right thing to click on. So I've talked to several of them, but we're going to ramp up training around that too in the future. So I just wanted to kind of show you that graph. Even though we haven't pushed the training real hard, people are aware, so they're less likely to click. So we can start seeing our line trend down. And then another exciting program that we were able to get from the NRECA is the RC3 program. It's the Rural Cooperative Cybersecurity Capabilities Program, and it's offered free to us too. So I got signed up for that and recently got access to that, and we've been working on that as a whole. It's not just an IT thing. Cybersecurity really goes down to everybody. Last line of defense is that phishing, because those are the people that actually click on it. I can't stop all of the bad emails that come to them. So this is just kind of lays out what that RC3 program is, and then I'm going to go into details of what we baseline where our cybersecurity is at the moment here at REMC. So it focuses on developing tools and resources for improving cybersecurity capabilities. Minimizing and managing cyber risk requires a comprehensive and continuous evaluation. So this program isn't a one and done. We're going to continue to evaluate it about every 6 months. We'll keep going back to it and seeing where our score improves. Gives companies visibility to their cyber risk and cyber posture in a manner that enables the prioritization of investments to optimize the protection of the business. And that's where this is going to lead into budget, because these are the things that we're going to recognize and we're going to prioritize from this from a cybersecurity to give, I'm not just asking for money to do something, this is going to actually help the REMC. And this program is based on the framework, it's based on NIST, and it just makes it real easy to communicate with everybody, and it's just not an IT-driven thing. So we'll step into the actual dashboard that we get from this. Our score, when we went through all the questions, and there's, I don't remember exactly how many questions, but about 165 questions that it asked. And you basically scored it as you don't do it, you partially do it, or you're fully doing it. And you'll probably never obtain the 500 score because you'll never be able to do everything. But right now we're about halfway point. We're at 262 on the things that we're doing. So, and then there's on the top right, you'll see it says target. Target right now says the same thing because we just got into it. We'll use our baseline and we'll actually set targets for those things that we aren't doing always, and we'll be able to track them there and see improvements. And the same thing with the left, there'll be milestones, so there will be large projects. If we, decide to put funds towards something, we can mark that as a milestone, and then we can mark that off and check those milestones as we meet them. If we need to apply money towards those, would be what I would mark as milestones. So during the questionnaire, there's 5 sections that it talks about. Identify is the first section that you go through. Within identify, you're looking at the sensitive data, your assets, your operations, and your entire electric co-op manages. So at this point, the needle is about halfway. So we're identifying about half the things that we have. We're doing it really well on the computers, the servers, those type of things. We're looking more at the SCADA side of things that we need to identify better. We have a few things in place, but we're working on it with operations to make sure we identify that even better. And then in this area, we can also improve on from the questions is understanding our threats and vulnerabilities, which part of doing that is the RC3 here, so we're starting to make progress on that. And then addressing and maintaining security of third-party relationships. So right now we aren't having tracking measures to track the third parties as well as we could. So enhancing that will help move the needle. So those are the areas that we're looking at with identify. The next section is protect. Protect is probably what you hire me for, is to keep things out of the network. We've moved the needle quite a bit further with protect. We have a lot of things in place with our firewalls and different security measures with our antivirus. And like I said before, what we've done so far is help move that with patching our operating systems and disposing of the old computers securely. And areas that we can improve on is the web and email filters. We currently use what Office 365 has, but they aren't the most strong. So there's other products out there that can help with that and help the end user not even get that email that they might click on, even though we're going to try to train them further. And then that's the next thing that we can do. We can train the employees even better in cybersecurity because it's not just an IT thing. The next thing is detect. Can you detect if there's anomalies going on in your network? And we're about halfway on the needle in there, so there's definitely areas to improve with that. We're strong. We're installing the antivirus, anti-malware software. The area that we can really improve on, which can be a focus for me in the future here, is maintaining logs and being able to review those logs. Usually that's a full-time job for somebody because the logs are not something that you just sit down and sift through. It takes a lot of analytics and stuff. So there's other things that can help with that too. And that's really helpful if you do have an incident to be able to go back through the logs and then determine if you've actually taken care of that incident or not. The lowest area that we scored on through the survey was respond. And that's basically having everything written down in a plan, in an action plan. Now, I could respond to something that happened, an incident or not, but if I wasn't here, it's not written down, it's in my head. I don't have it written down into a scope of work. So it's difficult. So that's more of documentation and making sure that we're able to respond, and anybody can pick up the playbook and go through that. And then the last piece is recover. That needle's moved pretty good because we do have good backups in place. There's always areas to improve and backup, but then you get into a lot of costs. So you have to weigh the cost of how quickly do you need to recover if something happens. And those are numbers that you can put together on that. And then other areas to improve is processes, procedures, and technologies. So just the documentation. Once again, I can recover a server, but if I wasn't here and they had to bring it back, I don't know how long it would take somebody if they could do it without me. So it's the documentation piece that's really important with the recovery piece. But those are the 5 different areas within the RC3 program. And like I said, we had everybody. We had financial, we had Crystal and her group, we had operations, and we had HR sit in on that and answer all those questions and go through all those questions. So it's a really strong program to work. And like I said, we'll be reviewing that. And I don't know if it's something in the future, if you guys want to hear from it, in 6 months review, to see where we move those needles to, so you can see we're making progress in the cybersecurity area. Does anybody have any questions?
So I know you guys are filtering our emails and everything. So if we're getting emails that we don't think that we should be getting, I assume that we should be letting you know.
Yes, you can definitely let me know. I can't promise that I can block them all, but yeah, you can let me know.
And are we still using the cave?
We are not using the cave. That was actually a prior one. It's been 2 backups before that. So the last offsite backups was over at Southeastern. We had a rack there, and I actually removed that rack and moved our backups to the cloud. Saved us about 2/3 of what we were paying Southeastern.
So are we at risk if we get an email and click on it, or if we click on it and send it? I know that's much riskier, but if we just click on it.
So it depends on what's in the email and where it redirects you. If it captures your login credentials, it presents a risk, because then they have login credentials to possibly log into the network and do different things on the network. If it's just taken to the website, it's a risk for whatever device you're using, because it may infect it with malware. But then if you bring it on site and you're connected to our network with it, then so it layers and layers. So yes, anything you click on, if you just open it up, you're not going to be at risk with just looking at it. But if you're clicking on the link and it's redirecting you, or you're downloading the file, then yes, it can be a threat.
So I have another email address that I use to retrieve emails. Does the firewall take care of those as well, then? Or the antivirus or whatever? Not only go to Decatur REMC, I go into mylife.com as well.
No, we don't block those emails. We don't have any filters.
Does that make this more vulnerable, this iPad more vulnerable because of that?
The more you look at it, yes, there's a chance. I mean, it's just like surfing the web on it. There's vulnerabilities there, yes.
Okay.
Now, on your producer side of the classes that you get $5,000 for, is that online, or do you have to go to Purdue for?
No, it's online.
Okay.
Yeah, they're only offering it online with the current circumstances.
What's the duration of that same? Is that 1 day, 1 week? Days over 2 months?
It's
Just out of curiosity.
It's a 6-month program. So there's 4 different courses, and I want to say it's 272 hours is what it adds up to be.
It's pretty intense then.
Yeah.
I'll give Sam credit. He found a grant and applied for it and got it, and it's going to pay off for us here. So. Any other questions? Some of those graphs that you saw on the needles and stuff, those would be some of the metrics that we put in place for IT that you'll see like when we do our annual review for metrics and things like that. So, Sam, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Disconnect, so I get Crystal.
Oh, yes. No, we were actually now moving to a executive session, so I'm going to have to ask the two to step into the hall for a little bit. Move forward with the
project. Is there a second?
Also.
Jason? Okay. I think we had our discussion, so all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, motion carries. The funds,
Thank you.
Do you guys want us to name the funds in the minutes? Does anybody oppose that?
I'm not opposed to the funds in the minutes, that's for sure. I think it's a good idea. Sure.
I mean, that's not why we had it in executive session.
Right, exactly. I agree. So we were talking, I've got to get to the number, wrong side. We were talking about releasing $60,813. Okay. If you're good, we'll move on to, I guess, it's the bill for, is it? Crystal.
All right, so I just kind of wanted to walk through 5 or 6 examples, just so I could show you guys what different scenarios look like on different bills. This, obviously, you all got your bill already, so this is what the how to read your bill looked like. Very colorful, lots of circles. As what we expected, we've had a lot of people call thinking that this was somebody's bill that they received that they weren't supposed to get, even though it said sample on it, and it was John Smith at 123 anywhere. But we had, I say a lot, but probably 20-ish calls that we've taken so far this month, confused that this bill said 200 and their bill was 150. So once we explained it to them, then they were all good, but we did get those few. We have not had anyone pay this bill yet, so that's a because I know some of the other co-ops that I had talked to, they said, we wish we never would have done it because they received so many back where the member paid this bill and not their own bill. We've not done that yet, so.
Pay the sample.
They paid the bill, yeah, so.
That might be good.
Yeah.
These graphs are exactly what Eric said. It's so that you can see how they're trending and tracking and highlight areas that, as a board member, you should be asking questions, and we, as a team, should be understanding what we may need to do or do differently. Did I answer your question?
Sure, yeah. But I was just, did anybody get the updated one for slide number?
No. Yeah, I'm not sure why I didn't update. Good.
So.
Yeah, make sure that they're numbered, that way it's a little
It would be a little
easier.
better, yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yep. So I combine these into one PowerPoint. So as you're looking at call to order and you go down through the key lines and you go through the statement of operations, they have their title pages in front of them, but they're in one document, whereas they're in 4 in your individual call to orders. So starting with the key lines, as you see, there's quite a few financial documents that we're going to try to hit on and go through this month. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in these first 2 documents that we went through last month, because honestly, the month of September was pretty inconsistent with the month of August, in my opinion. So we talked a little bit about, well, I mentioned this earlier, so this was me, and I appreciate the feedback earlier to try to work towards maybe a common solution, but we'll definitely get back to putting the financial report out there for the time being. But my vision of this page in the future is to be kind of Eric's comments, or the REMC's comments, as far as like what I see in the financials when I look at the balance sheet, when I look at the statement of operations, when I look at the cash flow, and I might throw, I don't know, to get kind of small, probably, I don't know about the planned investments, where maybe to potentially put that, but in my words, kind of what I see in those individual, the main financial statements that we have on a monthly basis. I'm not going to read that because most of what I'm going to say as I go through the next slides.
So this one, the balance sheet key lines, again, I mentioned there wasn't a lot of difference. A lot of things happened in the month of September as far as changes in the balance sheet. You see it moved about $500,000. You saw in Brett's metric that the kilowatt hour sales were down, so we paid Hoosier less, so our accounts payable was less. That's why we see this variance. And we charged customers less because there was less kilowatt hours sold. So that $500,000 is basically just a change in the activity as far as kilowatt hour sales for the month. Other than that, balance sheet was pretty consistent with the previous month. Okay, statement of operation key lines. So the month of September, pretty close from a gross margin standpoint, within a few $1,000s. Controllable expenses, consistent with what we've seen over the last several months. We're quite a bit under. We're just over $100,000 under budget in controllable expenses. Fixed expenses, pretty consistent to what we've seen. Overall for the month, from an operating margin, we're just over break even at $3,600, and we have a budget to lose $108,000. On the year-to-date basis, we're pretty spot on from a gross margin standpoint. A little over $7 million, only $12,000 variance to budget. Controllable expenses, same thing another month, right? So we're $455,000 under, sitting at $3.8 million. We think that number, as you saw in some of the other documents, is going to be $300 to $350 probably once we get towards the end of the year. But right now we're 10% off on that number. Fixed expenses, overall pretty consistent, only 1% off, which gets us to a little over $1 million operating margin, $500,000 over. But if you go down through the variances and differences and look, it's all sitting right there, right? $500,000, 455 of it sitting in that particular area. And then pretty small activity in the non-operating side in the month. So the cash flow summary, this is the version of the cash flow we've kind of started to look at. I added this box up here because as I was talking in this meeting last month, I realized it didn't say anywhere on here how much did it change in the month and how much did it change year to date. So in the month of September, our cash overall increased just over $11,000. For the year to date, it's increased $947,000 from where it was at the beginning of the year. So again, this section is just a high-level summary of this statement is cash in, cash out. So how much cash came out of our bank account, how much cash went into our bank account during those 30 days of September. And then this gives a little further breakdown of the cash that came into our bank account, the cash that went out of our bank account. Pretty consistent, in my opinion. I pick on this utility plant investment. We'll talk more about that later. That number's still a little shy of where we would typically like to see. And you can see we're at $986,000 for the year versus we were at 1.2 at this same period last year. So statement of operations. This one, pretty consistent, not going to say much about it. This one shows you can't even see the difference. We're so close on gross margin budget versus actual, so pretty spot on. This one might be a good one where I try to maybe pare down a little bit because it's an awful lot of information on it. This one, in my opinion, what I'm trying to do is show the composition of the kilowatt hours sold against the budget and break it down by the individual activity. So you can see we're under in kilowatt hours sold versus budget by about 30 million. What's that on a percentage basis? We're about 9.5% under what we budgeted for kilowatt hours. And then this one's where rubber meets the road. It's the gross margin. So of all the kilowatt hours we sold, we're meeting our gross margin, which basically means that's how much money we have left to pay all of our bills, basically, minus the power bill. So pretty consistent. You can see we're about spot on, like we saw before, right at $7 million. And the breakdown between the categories is pretty consistent to budget. This highlights the 5 departments within controllable. That one's about $135,000 under right now. I think that's going to hold through the year. In operations, we're going to end with about $125,000, I think, under for the year. Maintenance, we're about, I think that's $85,000 right now that we're under. I think that gap's going to close, and we're going to hit pretty spot on with the maintenance budget for the year. Billing, it's about right on, and probably it's going to end there. Corporate relations is about 50 under, and I think we're going to end about 50 under. We're about 70 to 80,000 under in A&G, and I think that's going to close a tiny bit, but not very much. And this just shows a trending over time of how we're holding against the budget. You can see the gradual trend under budget. These, I won't walk through all of these, but these in my head are things that you guys do have questions that you want to bring to the board meeting about individual departments, about why there's a variance or comment that I have. We can certainly address those and go through those at the meeting, but I'm probably not going to go through and detail all these with you every month. Again, it basically shows, I'll just hit this first one real fast. It shows how much the actual was for the month versus the budget, and then it shows over the year how are we tracking against budget. And finally, this is just a graphical version of the margin. So we know that we're well over margin, right? So you can see how we were tracking throughout the year. 5-year average is black, consistent, try to be consistent with these different colors. The blue is the budget, the green is the actual. So we had 3 months that we were quite a bit over budget, and then, as I said, pretty flat for the month of September. And then we have non-operating, pretty consistent, and then that graph just shows the combination of the two. So if we hit on plant investment quick, blue's budget, green's actual, orange is projected. So we're about 1.7 million under what we had planned to spend as of this point in time in the plant investment. This projection for the rest of the year in plant investment is about a around $1.2 million spend over the next 3 months, which will keep us about 1.7 under. So we're going to hold to the budget for the rest of the last 3 months. So question might be, you spent 1.1 over 9 months. What are you doing? How are you spending 1.2 over the last 3 months? So that's what I try to show down here. Orange means we think we're going to spend it this year, or we're pretty confident we're going to spend it this year. Green is we have spent it. So if you look at where there's orange and there's not any green, that one, that's the C2A one that we think we're going to get done. So there's a couple $100,000 right there. This one is the pole catch-up that New River's doing. We say we're going to spend about 600. We're at about 2 right now. There's 400, so that gives us 600,000 between those two. And then over here we have the digger and the staking truck, 325,000. I think both those are on site at this point, so those invoices are going to be paid. So that gets us up to about $1 million spend is between those three line items on here. And then this is just the numerical version of the same thing. So this is a new one this month. We wanted to try to start showing some more information about our cash balance, right? We all know cash has been high this year, higher than where it typically sits. So this black line, this is 2020 information. Black line is a 5-year average of each month of where we sat. So on 5-year average, we sat at about $1.5 million on average in our bank account. The green is actual, so for this year, we on average, right, we've been right around $2.5 million of cash. It's been in when I say cash, I combine the cash sitting in our bank account and the cash in our CFC investment portfolio because we can have it within a day, and so it's liquid cash in my opinion. This drop you see right here, it looks more drastic than on that plant investment scale, but it's really because of on that plant investment graph, but it's really because of the scale we're using. That drops from 2.5-ish down to about 1.3, so it's basically that $1 million we're going to spend in plant investment is what you see this drop as. So this bottom graph, there's not really any activity in it, as you can see from the note, but in the future, this is where we'll show budgeted loan draws versus actual loan draws to kind of just keep everybody on the same page as far as that. And then I have some assumptions down here, I think. I don't know if I've talked through them. Gross profits, assuming that kilowatt-hour sales play out like we budgeted. Controllable expenses, it's us trying to adjust those to what we think we're going to spend, and then plant investment updated with what we think we're going to spend as well. Oh, comment here, I just wanted to note real fast. And we have this policy called Working Capital Reserve Fund. And basically it says we'll have at least a minimum of 1% of our total utility plant kept in cash. So for us, that equates to about $47 million in plant, so that's about $470,000. We're probably going to be taking a look at that, because what we're going to see on the next graph, quite honestly, what I'd like to see that have is a range, because right now it's just a minimum, and there's really nothing up here, but I don't want to set an exact percentage, because then we can't ever be successful at it, right? But come up with a range of percentages of plant utility that we try to keep an average of that amount of cash in our bank account. So this one, I apologize, I know it's a lot of graphs, but so we'll try to work through it a little bit. I hope it's going to be useful information, but I'm certainly going to try to figure out how to maybe minimize the number of graphs a bit. So What this one, gosh, it's littler on here, hopefully on your sheet, it's easier to read that. It's a 10-year look back of what our cash has been, what each of these metrics have been. And just to step back for just 1 second, what this dashboard is doing, I call it the balance sheet dashboard. So like to try to look at the health of our balance sheet, we talk about cash a lot. So cash is on here. And then we talk about a lot about plant utility plant, because it's our biggest asset that we have. So these next two are under this total utility plant section to kind of to look at how much do we have, are we getting older, what's happening? And then this next page goes into the debt and equity side, which are on the liability side. That's what it all boils down to, in my opinion. So, from a cash perspective, you know, we see it going up. We were at $750,000 back 10 years ago. We dropped down to, in my opinion, awful low levels. Then why we got to these levels is because we were doing plant investment, and when we were drawing down against a loan, we waited, and then we drew a bunch down against these projects in 2016 timeframe, which is supported right down here when you look at property additions as a percentage of depreciation. So I'm going to jump around, but I think it's important that basically if we're adding property, we've talked about this at several meetings, we're depreciating every month, right? Our plant's getting older. So are we putting at least as much in as we're depreciating on a monthly basis? That's what this one's driving at. And when we shot way up right here, that means we added a bunch of plant. We added a bunch of plant right in here, and then we drew down on it. So that these right here are correlating with spending some money on plant investment. Your plant got newer, and then you borrowed the money at some point in time, I guess, when it was deemed necessary at that time. So to move back to this one, we're at the 2.4 that we saw before. We know we're going to drop down to about 1.3 by the end of the year. That's going to put us right in this category, right in this range, so still at a high level. But what the right-hand side of this dashboard is trying to do is trying to say, okay, is that good, bad? How does that stack up against the U.S., the gray bar, and the state is the orange bar? So we try to normalize the data because we have $47 million of plant investment. The guy down the road might have $147 million of plant investment. They need a different amount of cash than we do in our bank account in order to operate on a basis. So what this is doing is normalizing that information, and you can see we're still trending above once we get in these last few years. So again, that number is going to come down right to this area by the end of the year. So overall, I think it says to me at least that we do have a position in cash that is slightly above, and even at the end of the year, it will be slightly above where the national and state level is as for the size of our facility. Total utility plant, you see this is about a 3.5% to 4% compounding growth. We're about 37 million 10 years ago. We're at 47 million right now. You might think, gosh darn, that's an awful big increase over a 10-year period of time for your plant to be getting that big. Well, if you head over here, it takes the total utility plant and divides it by the number of consumers every co-op has. So again, it's a way of trying to normalize it and take get it on a consumer basis to try to figure out how do we stack up against somebody, the next co-op down the road. You can see everybody's heading up. You see ours heading up a little bit, and you see ours kind of flattening, still up some, but a little bit more of a flat than what you see the others heading up. So that tells me that we're okay, because when you look out here, we're kind of in the range of these, and we're slightly above the state, but a trend that kind of shows us leveling where others keep moving in the upward direction. And then this, what I mentioned a second, property additions is a percentage depreciation. This is the way that if we're depreciating more than we purchase, we're getting older, and then we're going to have big spend later, so we're wanting to try to at least be at 100% on this graph. And we are. This is a trend line that basically takes everything into consideration. We're at 120, but these large spikes pull that line up, right? And then when you look at the last several years, we're more down, pushing the 100% line, under for a little bit, a little over, and then right at it in this case. So when you look at it, try to normalize it again, you see A little bit of uptick, then a little bit of downward motion in the state. You see ours is just gradually heading that direction. So the plant investment that we're doing, I think this is showing is necessary. Otherwise, our line is continuing in a direction that is not consistent with others. This is trying to look at our debt and equity side of things. This one's simply just a stacking of what's your debt. It's about 16-something million right now. What's it made up of? CFC, Federal Financing Bank, and RUS. So that's just a composition of that. So of your debt, what's your interest rate look like compared to everybody else? So we were back at 5-something. We're at 4.7 as of right now. So we're higher. We're a bit higher than we're pretty close to the state, but on the national level, we're a little bit high. So that's kind of where that sits at this point. Debt and equity. This one's interesting to me. I like the time frame to try to understand like what's happened with our debt and what's happened with our equity over the last 10 years. So our debt number really sat pretty flat over the last 10 years at around $16 million, maybe slightly over there for a while. Our equity numbers had a pretty good upward trend over the last 10 years. So that's sort of what that's looked like over the last 10 years. This one over here, it's to show where we were in 2010, where we're at in 2020 as far as all the allocated equity that we do have. Is it REMC? Is it Decatur County REMC? Is it Hoosier? What's it comprised of? So you see we've had a pretty significant shift towards decreasing the Decatur County REMC side of it. And a lot of that's because we've made an effort to retire Decatur County, plus there was some really large allocations from Hoosier over the last 4 or 5 years, $2 billion plus. Then finally it comes down to overall, where I've heard a director say this and I think it's true, the REMC doesn't technically own anything. We borrow from the member or we go get debt for it, right? So the green down here is what we borrow from members. The blue is what we went and got debt for. So that adds to 100%. So we were at 54 or something, 54.9 in 2010. We're on, as of right now, we're 64 in that range. And the line you see going across are the same colors that were up above. It's the state and the national. So on the state level, we know that the state of Indiana tends to have higher equity than the national level. So we're pretty close on that line. We're going to probably tick a little bit above it in 2020 once we have that information. And sorry, I should have said this is KRTA information basically. So that's where I'm pulling all these comparison graphs. And one other comment I forgot to make, it's noted down here, but the 2020 information, I was considering if everyone thought it would be helpful to bring this set on a quarterly basis, and then I'll update it with where we sit at the end of that quarter and not show this every month.
Yeah.
So I know that was a lot, and I'll work to try to see how we can maybe condense some of that to hopefully make it work a little better for everybody as we move forward. What's next on
The next is the margin surplus options.
Okay.
I just comment, I know you guys I like the visual, just so you know that I do appreciate it. I totally get where they're coming from too.
Well, I'd like to make a mix of it because I definitely want to make sure we
A couple places in your narrative, you note that the employer's contribution to healthcare health insurance is a lot lower than we thought that was going to be for the year. So that triggered a question about the old, and maybe Brett knows, the old healthcare trust with IAC that was dissolved, and we were supposed to be reimbursed some of the funds that we had invested in that trust. Whatever happened with that?
So they're still waiting on making sure everything clears, is what I've heard last. In other words, they want to make sure all claims, all legal, everything is done before they actually dissolve all that money.
So is that going to be a significant dollar?
No.
Okay.
Well, I mean, depends on what you consider significant. I mean, I would assume it would be anywhere between probably 100,000 and $500,000. So, yeah.
Some portion?
Yeah.
Well, I would consider that significant.
budgeted this in literally 4 years, but, or whenever it dissolved, well, I guess it wasn't 4 years ago, it was 3 years ago. But anyways, our insurance plan was through a trust and it dissolved, and that's why we moved our insurance over to an RECA.
Okay.
The remaining members in, well, no, I think it's good review. The remaining members in that trust will get the distribution of those dollars. I want to say there's just like 20.
I just wondered if that correlated to the employer contribution to the health insurance you noted.
Yeah, we budgeted a little higher, high in that area.
So is there any kind of time frame on that? Are we talking about 23, 20?
I'm going to take an action on it because I have not heard any update on it.
And if we, one more, this will be, if we do receive those funds, that's not really income.
That's why I'm gonna talk through it more with him. I doubt there's something, unless there's something sitting on our balance sheet for that, it will be income. And I don't think there is. How much did you say before you thought? Well, I know, it's hard to say.
I mean, this is 3 years ago.
I think it's a lot less than that when we talk about it. Either way,
Well, those were projections back then too.
And I've looked pretty extensively through our balance sheet. If there was a significant number on there, I'd have been talking to Jenny. And I don't think I remember anything about that unless it was small.
I'll get updates on it. I don't know. I don't
The
know.
IRS has made amendments to make those non-taxable for nonprofits, commercial, and individuals too. So there's a lot of those came through last year, the anthem from the Teachers Association from Ohio, and the IRS stepped in and made a lot of those non-taxable and were a lower percentage. Like an example, like long-term capital gain, it's a different lower bracket for a lot of those nonprofits and commercials because there's several of those distributing funds.
That makes sense. Okay.
Same in my head too. For some reason, I was thinking, again, this was 2-3 years ago, but some of those may have to go back as far as to the employees that paid in. So that's another catch-all, and that might have been why it was more $50,000 than it was.
The percentage that they were involved in the years they were involved is just a formula they have to be distributed back to the employees.
So that's my point. Some of that
It's
may not all.
not, this is like the Nonprofit Teachers Association of Ohio, but it's dealing with, so okay. Probably a good comparison.
Yeah.
I tell you what, we'll present out next month, kind of where that's at, what the numbers are. I haven't heard anything on it. I'm not on the committee, so.
I'm just curious.
That's a good question. So this next one, it's the memo that you guys saw. I don't really have any slides on it specifically. So we talked a lot about the controllable expenses and kind of where we are right now under budget, where we think we're going to be towards the end of the year. $300,000 to $350,000 probably under the controllable expense side. And I know there's a lot of writing in there, but basically in my head, that's the number that routinely we're budgeting for controllable expenses every year. So in my head, that's baked into our budget. That's spend we're not going to have this year, and it's conferences. I don't want to just pick on those. It's a lot of things down the line. But in 2021, it's not going to be 2021 budget plus what we did. It's not like planned investment where you're going to have to do it at some point in time. It's spend. Those conferences are never happening. Those events aren't happening. It's money that's baked into our rates, and quite frankly, at this point in time, it isn't earmarked for something particularly. That's right to say at this point. I mean, you can always use it for something, right? So it's trying to figure out what to do with it. So here's some options we put together last month. One of the options that came up was a bill credit. That's listed as number 2 on here. I've stuck with $300,000 on this sheet right now because of it's kind of a little bit of a moving target. We got 3 more months to go at this point in time. So plus some money got set aside for the remodeling project. So trying to be a little bit conservative. I mean, as accountants, we're kind of trained to be somewhat. What's that?
That was capital. Controllable expenses, right now, we're under $455,000. And so we're going to be spending,
Capital expenses, right?
yeah, for the remodeling.
Right. I wish I had this.
But I'm talking controllable, and right now we're 455, and looking through the budget, I don't see where I think it's still going to climb.
No, I don't think so. I think
on controllables.
Well, for example, in the right-of-way area, that's going to continue to grow. I don't.
But it's budgeted.
It's actual versus budget and the timing of when those happen. I mean, I spend a lot of time going through those financials, and could there be something later in the month that moves a little bit one way or the other? Potentially, that's all estimates at this point in time. I don't foresee any hundreds, thousands of dollars. That number, in my opinion, at this point in time, that 455 sitting there is going to decrease at this point in time.
Well, we know for sure, just based upon right-of-ways that they're in.
I jumped a little bit of gears there because you're right. When I talked about hers, that was capital and that's not expense related. But when we think about $1.3 million of cash sitting in our bank account, both sides of this have to get looked at, right? There's $1.3 million going to be sitting in the bank account at the end of the year. How much are we willing and able and are comfortable with that going down? If we go spend $300,000 of it right here, we spend $60,000 of it on a project, we're down to under $1 million at this point, right, is our estimate of what our cash is going to be. So I think you have to look at both capital and that when you're looking at cash. In this particular area, we're saying that the potential excess of expense that was budgeted for and is routinely budgeted for every year that's not going to be spent is $300,000 to $350,000 range. So hopefully that's helpful.
That's part of the revenue requirement built into our rates. So in other words, what we're saying is that was never part of capital expense plan as far as.
We don't, in my opinion, we don't want to get to, if we say we go, okay, maybe it's going to be close to, we say it's going to be close to $450,000, we don't want to go underneath of our margin at this point in time. I mean, that margin was budgeted for a reason. It wasn't, so we don't want to get to, we don't want to okay something in here for $455,000 because that's the amount we're sitting under there, and then turn around and only being under $300,000, and then we just had an extra $150,000 that we utilized that really got ate up within the budget.
Didn't you have a note in there about $80,000 or $90,000 of right-of-way spend that hadn't been paid yet, that you knew you were getting it, it's done, but you just haven't paid it yet? So isn't that going to come out of the 455 like immediately?
Right, $100,000 of it is in that maintenance budget. It's a comment in the maintenance budget about that. So the options that we had laid out, I mean, these, at the end, there can be other options too. This is just some of them that we laid out, and I wanted to make sure we mentioned the ones that were brought up. So number one on here is, so we've got $282,000 of pure rest debts, not through FFB, so there are no prepayment penalties to that. So one option would be pay off that $282,000. It would save members $68,600 over the remaining life of that debt. And then on top of that, we suggested in here $21,000 of mowing on the Bruceville circuit that Brett could probably speak to better than I could. But overall, that option, $21,000 would decrease margin because that would be expense. The rest would not decrease margin, but it would effectively benefit the members because it would be paying down interest that expense that we wouldn't have to pay in the future. The bill credit, allocate $300,000. We looked into that, and with the policy that we have in place, we would need to allocate it, or not allocate it, excuse me, retire $300,000. And, well, that wouldn't be retire, would it? I don't know what the technical term would that be if you did it as part of a bill. If you did it as a bill credit, it would just be reduction of their bill, right? Essentially, the bill credit. So, but we would need to follow our normal process as far as like how we allocate those dollars out, and that would decrease the margin. Number three is, so right now I'm in the middle of, I wish I could be done with it now, but it's just, I want to make sure it's accurate and that we do it the right way and have as best information as we can, is this 10-year forecast that we do that comes through the CFC, one of the organizations we're a member of, has a massive Excel model that you can use to develop your 10-year forecast and what that's going to look like. So I am working on that right now. I've had CFC on site. I've been to some other organizations, get some input from other people sitting in my position, trying to work through that to understand the ins and outs of that so that we can try to develop the best 10-year forecast that we can. And once we get some of that worked out, I'm working on that project now, maybe potentially by the end of the year, we have a better idea of what cash is available to potentially use to allocate to, what's the right word? An additional capital credit retirement back to the members. We could have the $300,000. I don't know if there will be more at this point in time. It's something that I'm still working through. I wouldn't be comfortable saying that until we get through that model. But that would be an option to potentially wait until I get through that, which might be early 2021 by the time we get all that pushed through to make sure that it's accurate. But there would be that $300,000 that could be a capital credit retirement, and then we would just see what the model would bring to know what else could maybe be done as a retirement. And then the last page of this is just a summary of the RUS debt that breaks down the individual loans and what their interest rates are. I guess there was one more option on there too, just only complete the mowing only that was listed above. So, I don't know, read at that, I mean, is it just, what are the comments, thoughts, or Michael, or?
What do you all need for
Okay, so personally, I'd like to hear, is there one of these you're willing to, is there one you like, don't like?
Something explained better, that I didn't explain.
Well, I do have a question on giving the bill deduction. For a residential member, we're talking, what, a $30 bill deduction, bill credit on average?
We went and looked at the $317,000 allocation that we did, and it was, I think it was $18 was what their.
Okay, so we're talking about $15 to $18 for. Okay.
Eric, I have a question. As we look into 21 and we know our construction work plan, what do we think our borrow is going to be in 21?
That's what this model is going to help me figure out.
We don't know that exactly. Because if you run the amortizations on this and you can borrow money at the 1.2% or whatever it is on new construction, the paying off the debt versus borrowing the money, it's a wash.
Yeah.
Like, one of the options might be we earmark this 300 or wherever it ends up, but give us the option too to know what the exact number is at the end of the year, and then reduce the amount of borrow for 21 by that amount. And not borrow that money in 2021. Say, and then to Jeff's point, if it did come in at 385 or 455 or whatever, we would take that dollar amount and we would reduce 21's borrow by that exact amount. Because if you run the amortization on paying those 3 loans off versus not borrowing it, it's within a couple $1,000s. And if you pay those off, it sounds good and that's great, but how much is that really? It's going to lower your blended rate by how much?
It's not going to move very much.
Yeah, I can always see it.
So that's not really.
Our rate's going to drop if we're borrowing into this new loan when interest rates are low over the next couple of years, that 1.5 or whatever these interest rates are, it's going to bring our blended interest rate down at that point. So, I mean, part of it does come down to, what your point you're making is like, we've got 2019 and 2020 projects at this point that are eligible to be drawn. We could draw down that money, well, we have to go through the process and the forms and whatever, but say tomorrow we could borrow down that money once it made it through approval processes or whatever. I think it's, what was the number, $3+ million at this point of money, of projects that happened in 2019, because this construction loan was started at the beginning of 2019. We've paid cash for those at this point. And 2020, that's going to be, well, that's 1.1 right now, going to be 2.3 by the end of the year.
I'm not really advocating adding to that borrow. I'm advocating whatever, say it's $1,000. Let's make the math easy. It's $1,000 for 21. And we end up at 400 over. Well, now it's going to be 600. We're going to take the $1 million and we're going to use this 400 that's over, and we're going to earmark it for those projects. We're only going to borrow 6.
And one thing I think to note too is this next year's going to be really, really heavy on CapEx. I mean, it's going to have to be, because that's why we're behind this year. I mean, that's why our cash is.
But that scenario does not help our equity number either.
Does not help. Right. No, it actually was the opposite.
But either way, whatever you guys all decide, I am totally for the $21,000 from home. I'm in.
Suzanne?
I'm actually going to make a motion. I'm going to make a motion to give each one of our members, not meters and not based on usage, a $50 bill credit in December of 2020 as our Decatur County REMC member COVID relief. That would equate, starting a minimum of $325,000 if you take our 6,500 members plus. That's going to equate to that range. I know it's 6,500 plus members, but if we did a $50 per member, not per meter, not per usage, across the board as a COVID relief project for our members. That's what the motion I would like to make.
I'll second it.
So that reduces our margins by whatever that amount is.
Correct.
Okay.
That stays in the suggested rate that Eric wants us to stay between the 300 and 350. I'm just saying yes, I would think there'd be enough funds to do so.
I don't know if there's a bad option.
I just think it's a good relief measure.
Yeah, I like that. I just, do we don't get any trouble legally doing that, is my one question.
The only, I don't think so, but the only thing that could be a problem is that's not how we
allocate capital credits, what we're doing with bill credit.
yeah, but that could, I don't know if that's any different or not.
I like the idea, but before we said that, I'd like to run it past legal. We have a problem with that?
I'd like to vote on it tonight.
I'm not a lawyer, I just think it's a good project.
I really like it, because I think it's a good idea, but I want to make sure.
We can vote on it, subject to what legal
I was going to
requires.
say, can you make it
We don't have a vote on it, another meeting, and
I'm good with that.
so Crystal Screw's not scrapping at the last.
Right, I agree with that, I just, like I said, I want to make sure we.
I'm assuming it's fine, but I would check.
21,000 per month.
And then 21,000 per home.
You're gonna give me that too?
Yeah, we're giving our REMC members that.
That's the way they do.
I mean,
Can you run the quick numbers on that, how much are we actually?
How many, I don't know, we had 6,500 on
I just have.
Members.
members, not meters.
I don't know if you guys have that we can run those quick numbers to make sure we're.
Even if it goes over, we're.
Well, at 6,500 members, you're 325,000.
346 now.
Okay.
So you're right within that.
Okay.
And that's, again, depending upon, I mean, Eric's suggesting the 300 to 350, maybe it ends up being 375, maybe it ends up being 315. But
That comes to 346,000 right now.
you're going to reduce margin dollar for dollar or whatever we do.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
I just think $50 now is better than a 30-year capital credit sitting out there on the books.
I can agree with
Well, I
that.
think it's very sensitive and it's very timely, and it's very, we should, it's a nice thing.
The COVID credit? The COVID
the only problem-
The triple C, the COVID Christmas credit. That might have been somebody for Christmas, so you better just keep it coming.
Did you want to come?
The only problem I would see on this is just, and again, legal news, there's been a lot of lawsuits on capital credits. Honestly, we probably ought to talk about this in executive session.
Can we go ahead and make a motion and pass a subject to?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
The only problem is, yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to re-motion it though, based upon,
No.
legal's not gonna give you a yes or a no. Legal's gonna say, here's the risk.
So then
And we're
that's
voting yes.
no? We're voting yes. I'm just thinking the time frame for Christmas group. We're already at the end of October.
Can we at least get an opinion on it?
Can we
I'm
vote?
all for it, I wanna make sure that, there's been a lot of lawsuits.
I just like this over.
I would like to vote, but I don't want it to, I want it.
Subject to legal.
Subject to legal, but not legal opinion, not legal approved.
Well, they just don't tell us, no, we can't.
Subject to legal advice.
Yeah, subject to legal.
I agree with that.
Sure, how.
Because I don't want it to be like.
But instead of waiting and us doing emails and not being able to respond, I just think we should go ahead and vote on it.
Yeah.
Activity for them. What if you talk to our neighbors and ask them how they do theirs? Is that a flat deal per member, is it somehow
No, it's based on
their
KWH.
contribution?
It's based on their KWH. I mean, the only argument, and honestly, we probably haven't said this in executive session, but the argument's gonna be, that it's,
Let them argue with all the other members.
So we're going to
I don't think it's an argument, I think it's a lawsuit.
to give every member a credit
subject to different than what your policy is, yeah.
What's our policy?
Our policy says it's by revenue.
That's capital credits.
It
We're
is.
not talking capital credits, we're talking bill credits.
I would argue that it's,
Well, that's my motion, and then I guess if.
I think you can do a motion and get approval, that's fine. We'll just have to base it upon what we guys get back. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. So, that's, yeah. And any other thoughts on this from out here? So the motion is dependent on legal's advice, contingent on legal's advice, or something like that, correct?
I never thought of the illegal. I was thinking the abundance of money and reducing our capital credits in 30 years and producing our net margins.
I agree with that.
It's not in line.
It all comes back to how we develop our rates, right? So if a certain person has 50,000 kWh, they put a lot of money in. Whereas someone that's a residential person, they paid a bill of $120.
But on the flip side, a lot of commercial and individual residents are all suffering from COVID issues.
Yeah, no, I know.
So maybe there's a COVID law in there with everything else. It's just subject to COVID.
Or maybe there's a
I
justification.
think there's COVID on it, and I think that, you hear people staying at home with their children, that not normally staying at home, they're using usage. I think the COVID thing should be an issue with the legal, saying this is what we'd like to do for COVID relief.
I completely support it. Yeah, I agree with that. Like I said, I just want to run it by legal first. That I want that caveat in it because I don't know what else to.
I don't think anyone does, I agree.
So personally, I agree with it if it has that caveat in it, and I think we said it does. So
someone read the motion.
I would like to make a motion to give each member, not meter or based on usage, a $50 bill credit to assist our REMC members with COVID relief and mowing. I didn't have mowing in my notes, or how they're going to word that to include the mowing, with the recommendation of Eric's amount there of $300,000 to $350,000. Subject to legal advice.
thank you.
Make sure we tell Lee about COVID wording.
Also, does that make a big difference? I don't
I think
know.
it is in a lot of situations.
I second it.
Yeah. Any other discussion? Did you have anything, Steve? Okay. Carl, Jason? Brian, anything?
Read it as I have it written.
Yeah.
I simplified it. I said to give a $50 per member COVID relief credit and $21,185 for right-of-way mowing. Yeah, that was that one. Just move to give, yeah.
The credit, can you add bill credit? Or did you say that?
I said COVID relief credit.
COVID relief bill, credit, just add the word bill.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get interpreted with capital or any other type. I'm sorry.
Bill credit.
No,
And Suzanne, when you mean bill credit, you mean literally apply it to their account, right?
Yes.
I'm hoping so.
Is it able to do this in November?
That's why I want it off the 2020 books. If legal tells us tomorrow we can,
Probably.
But you might need 2 months to use
Well, because in case somebody doesn't have a bill, it's $50.
I mean, we could apply it,
Just show still wanted to go through the 2020 books,
right,
the majority of it. You might have some outliers.
right.
Could it not just be a credit on their account?
Yeah, it would just be a credit, so it would just come off their bill.
so they would
So
try
it
to
would definitely
$25
come off.
credit for January.
Yeah,
Then,
so unless their bill was less than $50,
But then they'll have credit for next
then
month.
they're gonna credit, but it would hit everything on the building for December.
Get it all used up.
Yes.
So when would be the latest you would have to know to be able to get that off of our 2020 books to put that on their
So
December?
I'll have to get a hold of NISD, because I'm sure they can do like a one-time like entry, so that they can do it as a mass. 'Cause I'm not gonna sit there and add this credit to 6,700 accounts, so.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that'd be too fast. I'll find out tomorrow.
Thank you.
But if it is, definitely December, because I mean, but I'll find out.
Do you have a motion on the floor? Any other discussion on this? Okay. Go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
I'll see if we can get that out tomorrow. We probably won't get an answer tomorrow, but I bet it would be early next week.
Okay. Sounds great to me. Okay. That takes care of that. We're going to move on to the policy review. This is just the red lines from last month brought to us. If you read through them, I believe, when I looked at them, I thought they looked right. Any issues with the red lines?
I'll move to accept the red lines.
Second. Okay, all in favor? All opposed? Red lines accepted. Okay, we have the resolution for the annual meeting date. This is required that we have a resolution.
So all we're here is we're trying to keep it consistent with the June date. That's about the only good date in June, so we wanted to get it on the calendars. Format, all that stuff's we'll determine that. This is more or less just the date.
It is a Friday.
It's a Friday.
Any discussion, any issues? Do I have a motion to accept the resolution?
I move to accept it.
Steve, a second?
I'll say.
You don't want to take it? All in favor? Opposed? Resolution accepted. I sent everyone a copy of these dates to look over. Of the moved meetings and the actual budget meetings. I didn't hear back from anyone. We okay with that? Okay. So I guess we do need a motion to move, do we need a motion to move the meeting? No, so, actually.
Oh, yeah, we do, to move an actual date of the board meeting, you do need a motion for both.
Okay.
You can probably do it in one motion, right?
So moved.
Move the November and December board meetings
To the Tuesdays, right?
to the Tuesdays. Jeff, motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Suzanne? All in favor? Opposed? Board meetings will be moved in November and December. Okay, Brett, this one has your name on it.
Michael, in addition to that, there was a budget date. I mean, that's for December 8th.
Yeah.
On that, we're thinking that's pretty solid then, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Those are the dates we're going to stick with at this point, so.
Are we doing the lunch?
For the,
And December 8th meeting, as we have done in the past.
that's a good question. I like it. I'd be good with providing the lunch to the staff.
I'll be here that morning, but I'll go to work this afternoon. Yeah.
Because we probably ought to get on some schedule if we think we want to do that.
I'm good with it.
I'm good with it.
So do you want to have the same caterer, or do you want to do something different?
Stones.
You want to take care of that?
Yeah.
Will you take a check?
Are we going to go through that? I am not suffering from a coin shortage, so you're about to pay with cash.
Okay. You ready now? All right, we're ready now. All right, so we're gonna go through the 2021 merit increases. This is more or less just kind of filling you in kind of with where we're at and everything. Obviously, the budget's where the approvals for this stuff lie, but wanted to get everybody's, just to update everybody. It's similar to what we had last year. So anyways, so how do we do on merits and what is our philosophy? So the overall philosophy or the goal of our merit program is to build loyalty, to retain top talent, and boost morale. The idea is we reward the most productive, which will incentivize others to perform. We want to perform employees and to pay them market value, that's the market value for an energy sector, and you'll see the data here in a minute, for the duties that they're expected to perform. Our philosophy is we speed up performing employees who are below the market value. We're going to talk about first quartile a lot, which is the bottom 25%, which means you're below the bottom 25% of everybody in the peer group that's doing those same duties. And then we slow down anyone or stop growing salaries that are above that third quartile, which means you're above anyone over 75% in that peer group. So performance evaluations, again, we do, it's a pay-for-perform model. It's based on 5 company competencies, and the managers get 3 extra ones from a leadership standpoint. We establish company goals that are derived from the strategic planning and filter down to employees. So we do our strategic planning, we create projects, you all approve those projects. We put those goals at the manager level, at my level, at the manager level, they filter down to the employee levels. And then it's basically a 5 all the way from outstanding to does not meets. Those are all defined per goal and per competency. And then we use the very similar where we sit down, we do a mid-year, and end of year, very similar to what you see in other organizations. So when we talk about peer groups and trying to figure out what is the market value for the duties that someone's doing, and this isn't made up, this is actual data, but we don't have a heavy duty mechanic, so that's why you see this one up here. So what we do is we go into a database that we get from NRECA, our national, right? They do a ton of surveys to find out across the United States what the going rates or the market rates are for the job duties that are set. So for this one, a heavy-duty mechanic, if I go into there, it's going to define what a heavy-duty mechanic does, their job duties, and it'll align with our job duties and our job descriptions. What you'll do is you get 3 different peer groups, right? So you're going to get it based upon customers served, revenue, and then total utility plant. Those are our peer groups. So where we end up at is we're less than 10,000 customers served. We are between 25 and 60 in operating revenues, and then we are between 1 and 50 in total utility plant. So what you do is you take, so the median, for instance, you're going to take the median for this peer group, the median for this peer group, the median for this peer group. You're going to average those 3, and it's going to give you 25 percentile, a median, and a 75 percentile for that market value of those job duties. The other way to look at this is it's U.S., so you can look at these peer groups by U.S., regional, which regional we follow the regionals from NRECA, which is West Virginia, Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. Yeah, it's full. And then we also look at the state of Indiana. Typically, you don't see much variance between the 3. If you do see a variance, we usually average 3. So that's how we come up with the peer groups and how we come up with these per whatever the job is. So here's a great example of what that means. So you're going to have that third quartile, which you're going to see is this, then our median, and then our gray line, which is the first quartile. And this is the median. Where we want our folks is in between here. So if they're below here, we're going to speed them up, right? So they're going to get a higher raise. If they're above this, we're going to slow them down, if not stop them, right? Again, there's one of these for every single position that we have that matches the job duties, that match the actual data from our survey. And again, this is just one I pulled out, it's just an example. So then one thing you look at is, where is Decatur County REMC? If we look at all of our employees, we take every one of the employees' job duties, we take the peer groups that we talked about, and we take all the first quartiles and we aggregate them all together. Same thing with third quartile, same thing with the median. Obviously, as a company, you're gonna have some people down here, you're gonna have some people up here, but where do you wanna be as an entire group? Somewhere in between the two, right? And you can see, this is based on 2019, so this is based upon last year's study, because we're working on this year's study. We're about right where we wanna be. So, of course, you've got some probably high and some low, but as a group, I would suggest right where we kind of want to be. Then we get to the metrics formula or the matrix. This is very similar than a lot of companies use, and it's very eye chart-ish, and I'm going to try to walk you through what really matters here, right? So the first one is this middle number. This is what we use as published salary increases. I'm going to go over that here in a minute. That's where everything starts from. So if you are an employee that gets a competent, which means you're meeting and sometimes exceeding expectations, and you're within the median of your salary range, that's the percentage you're going to get. If you're below, we're speeding you up. If you're above, we're stopping you or slowing you down. So things to know is if you get an unsatisfactory, you don't get a raise. If you get a marginal, only if you're median or below, you're going to see the CPU, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. So everything starts around this P, which is the published salary increase. It moves up and down based upon inflation. This inflation is both of these two numbers we literally go get, right? And then if you're in this area here, we're going to try to stop you, but obviously if you have someone that's performed very, very well, they're a long-term employee, you may want to look at doing some type of bonus salary. So that's why that's on there. Okay, so what are the numbers? So for 2021, again, we use three different metrics, or three different sources of information, and the whole point of that is we take an average of that. This is built into the way that we do it in our plan. So we use Mercer and this Willis Towers Davis. You get a 2.8. So these are, this is what the industry is seeing, or sorry, this is what, is being seen across the United States. Society so this is Sherm, they're at 2.9, and then IEC is 3, so that you take an average, you get 2.9. So that's what we're going to use, what we're suggesting on using for the P is 2.9. Now, how do we move that number up and down based upon where you're at in your salary range and your performance is inflation. Inflation got hit because of COVID, obviously, right? So it's normally around 1.4 to 1.8. It's at 0.62. So what that means is the folks that perform very, very well this year aren't going to see as big of an increase from the normal increase, or the person that's above the third quartile or below won't see as big of a move up or down this year based upon inflation. Again, this just comes from the government website. I see that means Consumer Price Index. All right, so put all that together, what's this mean? You take the published number at 2.9 I talked about, you take the CPI, which is the inflation, 2.9 goes here, you go up and down with the formulas you have below, it's what you end up with. So again, you can see here, if you're in your third quartile, you probably won't get anything unless we think that, it's something that you had an extraordinary year, that we'll look at a bonus structure. If you're below, of course, we're trying to speed you up to get you to your salary range. And that is it. Questions on how this is all put together? I know it's kind of, so what we're doing right now is we'll be doing the end-of-year reviews, all right? So that will establish, essentially, where they fall out here, right? And then we're also putting together for each and every single job position what their data is for 2021 here. So I do this part in coordination with Jeannie from the actual NRECA database. The managers do these based upon the goals and the competencies that were set. Questions?
You go back to the one that showed the 2.9. You got that?
Yep.
So all 18, 19, and 20, the one that you used was just slightly below that average, and 21 is not.
The reason I left it at 2.9 is because the CPI was so much different.
Go back one more screen, Brad.
Got it?
changes on this one from last year? I didn't think so, but I did remember for sure.
These are the formulas we've been using for a couple of
The
years.
numbers change, obviously.
Yeah, the P and the concepts.
You changed the third quartile last year.
Last year we did change this. And again, the point there is unfortunately every job has a salary cap or a market value. You can't pay a diesel mechanic $400,000 a year, whatever it is. Any questions on how this gets put together? Again, so typically what we do, last year it was a little different, but typically whatever this middle number is, by the time we're said and done, that's probably what we're going to end up setting, right? Close as far as salary, wages in general, as a whole. I'd be very shocked if we're above or below this. That means you either have, if you're below it, you have a bunch of underperformers, and if you're way above it, that means you have a bunch of overperformers. Usually you have a mix. I can show you, actually, I thought it was pretty interesting to see. This is dated, so I think it was 2018 maybe. But I stuck it in here just so everybody's kind of knows. I mean, so, you know, I don't follow a bell shape, but typical in organizations, you're going to have a bell shape, right? You're going to have most people that are meeting the needs, and you're going to have a few folks that are really, really exceptional, and you're going to have a few folks that aren't. And this shows you right here, and again, this was a couple years ago, so the CPI and all those numbers were different, but you can tell that not everybody gets a flat, you know, raise across the board. It's based upon that matrix that you see.
That information is not on call to order, correct?
It is not, but I will put it on there. The only reason I did is because I really wanted to have a conversation about it. But I'll put it out there, for sure. And what, like I said, what we'll do is I'll be working with the managers again to get this done. I'm about halfway through pulling the data from here. So the only difference to this is we do not use this for union, right? So that's a negotiated contract. This is literally for salary or hourly that's not union. All right.
Sounds good. Eric, do you have capital credit retirement?
Yeah. So did you email this to the?
Yeah.
They have this, okay. So my understanding is that typically at the October board meeting is when this gets brought each year. Basically, it's us looking at what our allocated equity is, and you basically going through the math of determining what that amount needs to be to stay at the 30-year payout. So the memo walks through the different pieces of the policy and what we need to do. We need to plan for the rotation of capital credits. Then we need to maintain cash at least 1% of that $475,000, which we will. Capital credits be retired at date recommended by the CEOs, approved by the board. And then we need to retire at least one half of the oldest year, and then it's at the board of directors' discretion if we wanted to retire something newer with the other half. So page 3 of this document, so this is the new KRTA data that just came out in the last couple of weeks. So a couple of the graphs that I think are important in the conversation are the annual capital credits retired as a percentage of equity. So that one basically shows a decreasing trend for us over a period of time. But we had some really significant retirements in 2015, and this works out for the bill credit. That will help this because the bottom side of it's equity. So as you decrease in equity, that will help this percentage. So we're moving in a downward direction, but yeah, that will help it with retirement. And the second one is the equity as a percentage of total assets. So this one again shows us creeping upwards, which we're able to do that bill credit. That's going to help with this, but that's something we're going to need to look at. And you know, at some point in time, I think at one point in time we might have had a equity policy as far as like what we're going to maintain this and that. And it's probably something we might want to consider like looking at some point in time to get more guidance to try to drive the direction of where we want that to go. So that's what those two slides are, basically showing where we stand as of now. The fourth page is me taking the same information that you got last year, but I left the numbers, but I put it as a graph to basically show the retirements as far as I like the graph side because visually I can see what's happening easier in my opinion. This is my personal opinion, but whichever way works is fine. So it shows you that basically towards the very first year we retired anything was 1968, and we didn't do much for a while. Then you can see when we get to the early 2000s, some pretty significant increases in the retirements that we've done, ending with the 816 that we did in 2019, and then different colors at the bottom basically break out what's Decatur County REMC and what's Hoosier. So just a representation of kind of where the retirements have been. The last 10 years, we've been right at about 800,000 average. There's been some higher and lower, obviously, in there. The next page of it is just the real granular detail by year of allocated margin and the retirements that happen in each of those. I separated it between Hoosier and Decatur, or excuse me, yeah, Hoosier and Decatur. If we look at continuing to do the same as we have for 2021 and continue just to do the Decatur County side of things, that's what on the document, the yellow cells are. We have $15.4 million of remaining Decatur County equity to allocated equity to retire. And the way the math works of that we've done in the past is we take that total amount, we divide it by 30. So you divide that by 30, it comes out to $515,000 would be the amount. And in the resolution, it's just, for now, it's set up to just take the oldest years that are sitting out there and spreading it over that. So as far as like a normal retirement, that would be the amount that equates to keeping us at that 30-year level that we've set to this point.
And again, the only reason we brought this month was just so that we had a confirmed number for the budget. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to do it today, but we can put a placeholder in the budget.
Eric, you brought it up, so I'm going to ask the question. You were talking about putting this 10-year financial forecast together, and you wanted it to be accurate. It's taking a little longer to get it done. When we were talking about other options, and you were talking about equity management policy. So what number are you using for the equity management piece to do the 10-year financial forecast, since the board has not given direction?
I'm not that far yet.
Okay. But would that not be helpful if the board would give some direction on that as you continue that 10-year thing? Because that's going to change that quite a bit.
Yeah, it would certainly be helpful when you see in the metrics. I don't know if it might have been in the earlier one of the graphs earlier. We're upwards of 64% of equity at this point, which yes is members' money to try to figure out how to return that to them. And so it comes down to need the cash, right? So you're either getting it through the rates or you're borrowing it down through debt, which is at a good rate right now. So it's that would be helpful.
About putting this equity discussion on the table and getting something back in place, and maybe before this 10-year forecast gets finalized, that might be a good time to get that done.
It would be helpful, and I took you down so many roads, you guys down so many roads earlier when I mentioned that our cash number is 1%, which is $470,000. And I mentioned that I think it maybe needs to be a range, and I don't think that's high enough. I think we'll still stay, even with these other things that we're doing, we're still going to stay above it. My opinion on that is we ought to be, when I look at some of the other metrics, probably 2 to 3%. That would mean cash in the bank of $800,000 to a little over $1 million of cash at any point in time is an average to have. There's a lot of schools of thought to that. I've reached out to some other CFOs. Some say they keep one month's Hoosier bill is the cash number they try to go. And something that I've used and heard people use for years and years and years and years is 2 months of your operating expenses outside of your operations. That'd be about $900,000 for us. So that's kind of where I'm thinking of this 2% or 2 to 3%, because that's another really important number, because that drives the debt piece of it too, in combination with where we maybe want the equity to go. So yeah.
It's been a conversation that's kind of been put off, but it's really a board responsibility to get that equity target or some range, or at least have a discussion about it, because it's not fair to you to say, make a guess for us, and we'll, it's really our responsibility to do that.
Well, I think right now we're just, it is whatever it falls out to be.
Right, and that's not managing it at all.
That's not.
You see what's happening.
It's crazy, yeah.
It's crazy because it's 60 over 64.
We'll get margin from the members and pay them back in 30 years, or you go get it from the bank and pay them back in 30 years. It's that simple.
Just something for everyone to think about.
But yeah, which proportions, eventually we'd like to have that, because then we don't have to have, it gives us the guidance in there.
So,
And to answer your question, Jason, a little bit more, I mean, we've spoken about kind of where we want to be, and you're exactly right, it kind of is, it is what it is based upon all the borrowings we said we were going to make and being on this 30 year. I mean, this is literally a number that just says, we do the calculation, this is 30 years.
well,
I don't know if that's the right way of doing it, right? Typically, it would be driven by an equity number. Yeah. So.
That's definitely something to think about, an equity number. Probably, it's a good, we'll put it on the agenda, at least bring it up next month again. If anyone comes up with a target they think is good.
What I would suggest, Michael, on that is once we get this 10-year done, I think what would be very, very helpful is for folks to see what that means. So what does having a high equity mean? What does having a low equity mean? Because, I mean, you'll have a 10-year forecast that will show you that, right?
Well, what's the pros and cons?
Correct.
I mean, what's the, not just, what's the detriment to us holding on to our members' money for 30 years? What's the
Royal banks, right?
Right, and that's what I'm saying.
One of the
So exploration and education on that whole concept, I think, would be very beneficial.
I agree. So, since you brought that up, rough estimate on the 10-year forecast, so we can start to see that. So we can, 2 months? A month? 3 months?
Easily, but I shouldn't say easily. My goal would be we're towards the end of October.
We got a lot coming.
Budget and.
Yeah, that's part of the meeting negotiations.
I would certainly, my goal would certainly be, and I hope I'm going to try my best by the end of this year, so that early in 2021 we'll be ready to. I mean, I'm working on it. I feel like I'm ready to get going on it. I've got CFC in here to help me to get started on it, and I've used Excel for 20 years, so I'm pretty good at it, but it's a pretty complicated model. And then when you get into projecting out using power requirement studies, your revenue factors, and the costs, and it gets, you need to be really careful. And it's shooting for as quickly as possible.
Well, I just so we're looking at the first of the year, hope at best, probably.
I would hope so.
Okay. Yeah.
As soon as I'm going to work really hard to do it as quickly as possible, and I'll be sure.
I understand right now it's a busy time though,
Yeah.
so. Okay. So anything else on capital credits specifically?
No, but we'd like to get approval on this number, just so that we can use it for a budget.
I'm fine with the total amount. I don't like the years we're allocating it to. I'd rather pay down some of the higher years, like 96, 04.
It's required just a little.
The other one is half of the old.
Yeah, so I'd say half of 94, because we're 3 years ahead.
Yep.
I'd say half 94, start paying down 96, just to help in the future.
that's a big jump.
Yeah. We got several, 96, I said 04.
Any suggestions as far as kind of the allocate, because either way, it doesn't, for us, it doesn't.
I would say you have that, keep that total number, just do half of 94, do the remainder in 96. What my suggestion would be.
Is that informal?
Everybody else thinks, but
Do you want to make that a motion?
does anyone else want to discuss?
I think it makes sense, because it's a huge number, it's the oldest, obviously.
Yeah, I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
So here,
Your check. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, the educational, that's all about Duke Energy, moving away from coal. just like Hoosiers doing. So it's the trend. Any comments on it?
Any specific educational things that anyone would like to see coming up? I mean, I've been throwing some articles that I thought was relevant, but is there anything else you guys would like to see? You know, at one point in time, we were putting like the governance task force pieces in here. I'm open to whatever you want to see in the educational part. I just know we talked about having an educational component to every board meeting, so. If you,
Is there something we utilize better? I don't know of something, so. So if anybody sees stuff, please send it either my way or Brett's way. Union negotiations.
it's up to you whether you have 2, 1, 3.
And you said, Susan said you
I'm not gonna be able to do
Suzanne
it
said
that
you
week.
can't. Carl, are you going to be able to?
It's a holiday weekend, like the 10th and 12th, like right between.
10th and 12th.
Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to make it.
Tends to start on those.
9 to whenever we finish. I mean, it's up to you. You don't need to have, I mean, if Steve's going, it doesn't matter. Either way.
Touch and go with the crowd right now.
Steve, are you okay if you're the only one? Or would you? Not really.
No, I'd probably be okay with it,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean that somebody else
Right.
doesn't, or if it was in somebody else's schedule.
Yeah.
I would be willing to, I know the one day was bad for me, so I could do possibly the other.
We need, so, motion, I don't think we need any motion, but right now, planning on Steve, if you can make one, I'd be hard to make for me, so.
I think it's just important to have you, like, one board person, at least.
And then do you see, if I don't make it the first day, it'd be pointless to come and say?
No, I think I'm okay.
Okay, I didn't know, like, if you said a reminder.
It'd be good for you to see some of it. I mean, although, I mean, maybe we won't need a second day, I don't know.
I feel it's
It doesn't cost anything.
That's right.
I had to write down the dates where I was at hometown. January. So, Jason, who's your MD?
Yeah, we had a board meeting, the minutes are in your board packet, a couple of highlights I wanted to point out. Moody's did affirm Hoosier's A2 rating and changed their outlook from stable to positive for Hoosier following the mirror closure. Everyone is scrambling to get away from cold. The other thing, Donna reported that Hoosier expects the average wholesale rate to decline by up to 7% through 2024, which is a really big deal for us. As these mirror contracts are coming in, these replacement, we're still authorizing Hoosier to negotiate contracts for capacity and energy requirements for mirror. So very few of those have been signed so far, but we continue to engage with people about that. Tomorrow is the strategic planning event with the Hoosier staff. My understanding is that will be done virtually with the Hoosier staff, but whoever wants to come here can come. It's at 10 o'clock, I believe.
Yeah, 10 o'clock in the boardroom. Yeah.
Your strategic planning.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
There'll be a presentation, and Hoosier will be presenting electronically or whatever.
We're going to tape every one of these too. So, and the reason we're doing that is because we're going to create a report. You will see the report out anyway, but we're also going to videotape them. So, like I said, if anyone has any, you can always watch it.
This last week, we did Donna's CEO evaluation. It was facilitated by a professor from Indiana University. And so that was completed, and then this next week will be committee meetings, and I'm now on the operations committee, so I've been moved, so that'll be this next week. So that's it.
Yeah, we had a board meeting, virtual board meeting yesterday, so I'm like, who should we don't have minutes on that quick? There's a couple of things then that I want to bring to your attention. The 2021 professional development catalog is now available from the website. When John Gaston spoke, he mentioned the 6 organizational goals for the coming year. It includes examining the dues formula, hoping to do that early part of next year. Rethink the IEC facilities. I'm on that committee, or have been on that committee. We've had a couple meetings back in the day, but they're saying there's a lot of changes could potentially take place because of COVID. IEC board meetings, again, these are organizational goals. Member engagement, he wants to attend some of the board meetings or open board meetings with us at some point, so that's a good thing. Developing a fiber apprentice program, that's just going to investigate some research there. And then have a vision for the year 2040, so that takes about 20 years. The 2021 proposed budget was approved, and across the board, there was no increase. So basically, the dollar amount for last year is the same thing as it is this year. And other than that, that's all I have for that.
I have, next is Jason, Board Accountability.
We have no report.
Okay. Does broadband have anything?
We will have something, yes.
But not this report. Okay. The one, did anybody do any director training this month? I didn't think so. I didn't know about it. Did you?
No, I didn't get a director training, but I was involved in the regional NRECA meetings.
Okay.
Again, those were virtual. I provided a week of the continuity. Early in the meeting, that there were a few technical issues, but not a lot really came out of it. The main guest speaker was Colin Powell. He actually was the energy secretary back in the day. I'm not so sure what exactly that was. He's also a man that has a lot of quotes. Peace is the solution to conflict. Take care of your troops and they will do anything for you. Remain calm, be kind, and there's several that he's smart about.
And then something I said we'd come back to and we didn't was the boardroom upgrades. Are there any thoughts on that? On those upgrading from the projector to a flat screen?
Do you think about that for a month? Put it on the agenda for next month?
Yep, I'm fine with that. So
I'll actually send you all the information through email on that, but yeah, there's no, have to get it done this month.
okay.
And then something, Michael, Decatur data, can we get that uploaded onto the dashboard? And will we be doing any type of review on that?
So this all goes back to what we've been working on for the, to answer your question, yes, we're doing our ops review on November 11th. So the ops review will capture all the KRTA data that we will actually be tracking and trending. Once we do that, you guys will see that.
But can we get it on the dashboard?
Sure.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
I have one question.
Yes.
Back to the capital credit retirement. When do you guys want that done? I know like this year, there was kind of some confusion on did we forget to do it, and we're kind of hurrying to do it. And we talked about, do you guys want to make just a specific, like do you want it